Okay, let's get it. Black girl magic dripping. Yeah, she's on a mission. Keeping our culture lifted. Now you can watch and listen to Tammi Mac. Tammi Mac. Oh, what show is that? It's the Tammi Mac Show on Fox Soul. Tammi Mac. Tammi Mac. Yeah. Ooh, that. Tammi Mac. Tammi Mac. Hey, so you know this. Tammi Mac. Hey, Tammi Mac.
Welcome to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. I'm Tammi Mac, and good evening, everybody. According to UNICEF's article, Talking to Your Kids About Racism, it can be a daunting task. Now, while many parents worry about exposing their children to conversations about racism and discrimination at an early age, some parents don't feel comfortable talking about racism because they haven't experienced it. But for many Black and brown parents, they simply don't believe they have a choice. While there is no one-size-fits-all approach, the earlier parents start these conversations with their children, well, the better, right? Tonight, the business of being Black on the Tammi Mac Late Show is talking to your children about race and racism. Please welcome early learning expert and social justice advocate, Will Tolliver Jr. Hi, Will.
Hello, Tammy. Thank you for having me.
Public servant, Alfred Shivy Brooks. Hi, Alfred. Or shall I call you Shivy?
Shivy is good with me. How are you?
You got it. And public policy research professor, Dr. Ioma, Iruka, and educator, writer, and activist, Jose Luis Vilson. Hello, Dr. Ioma and Jose.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for being here. So every night on the Tammi Mac Late Show, we ask a traditional question, and I have decided that I'm going to amend the question a little bit from this day forward. I generally ask, why should Black people care? And I've decided that basically from some of my panelists who oftentimes when I ask this question suggest that all people should care. And so I've decided tonight, without my producer's knowledge, sorry, Alicia, I've decided tonight to amend the traditional Tammi Mac Late Show question number 1. And that is amending it to, why should America care? And so tonight I ask, and we'll start with you, Dr. Ioma, why should America care about how we talk to our children about race and racism?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And to me, America should care because we have seen many, many countries get destroyed because of internal conflicts, not because of outsiders like communists and Russia, but because of internal civil conflict. And if we do not address this most intractable issue called racism, the elephant that's in the room, this means that it's going to destroy us from the inside out. And so this is literally for the soul of our country in many, many ways. And so even for those white people who are like, oh, I don't care. I'm not the one that's being oppressed. I'm not the one that's being murdered in the street. I don't care. The fact is that you will get destroyed. We will get destroyed if we don't actually attend to this. And this means that we have to start really early. We can't wait till your kids are 14, 15, when they can go, get a job, get a cell phone. But we have to start early when children are literally developing their brains, when they're developing their minds and their identities. This is literally the soul of our country. So this to me is one of those things where if we don't do something, it is going to kill us.
Oh, wow. That's deep. Chevy, why should Americans care about how we talk to our children about race and racism?
America should care because we don't have a choice. Truly, America will never realize the promise that this nation has until every single citizen, every single resident, every single person in this country is able to be liberated, is able to live up to the fullest of their opportunity. So long as we have people who are disenfranchised, people who are poor, people who lack access, we will always be living short of who we should be and what we should be.
Absolutely. Jose.
I'm a big believer that if kids are old enough to experience racism, then they're old enough to actually talk about racism. And so too often we see situations where you have the white parent who clutches their pearls or like hides their purses. And of course, you think, well, you also microaggression against me. And then it's like, actually, their kids are picking that signal up too. And so then they start replicating the microaggressions, which to me aren't even all that micro. They end up being macro over time, right? So for me, I feel like if you start healing the wounds by talking about the thing that's actually hurting us time and time again in this country, you can actually rectify the situations that are happening, whether it be like the long-term macro things like reparation, or even the smaller things like whether or not Black people are able to get equal pay across the board. And I mean, even that's not small to us, right? But our little behaviors end up manifesting into larger things. And we have to start with our kids first and foremost, because they end up being the ones that receive all the messages that society gives to us. And so society needs to reflect that and keep that same energy and be better about that energy by talking about racism with kids.
Yeah, I often talk about on my show about the one little incident when I was in kindergarten and my dad had done my hair that day. And need I say more? My dad had done my hair that day. So it was pretty like, I wanted it down, but down is out for Black girls, right? And I remember the teacher saying, can you put your hair down? Yeah. People behind you can't see. And I think that's one of those microaggressions you're talking about. And I at an early age, I learned that my hair had to be tamed, much like it is today. Unfortunately, you can see that stuck with me, right? Will, why should America care?
I mean, all of y'all are hitting it home. I think it is about that point of centering the child. Jose, like you said, our children are having racialized experiences from the time that they are born. So why not talk about it? And why America should care is because our kids, like you said, are harboring these things. It's affecting their self-identity in a negative way. Tammi, similar to you, I remember whenever I was a kid, I had a moment. I grew up in basically an all-white neighborhood. I remember a time in my life where I wished I wouldn't be Black. I wasn't Black. And it took me time to learn to love myself because of where I grew up. And it's our kids that are most affected by this, and they're going to have to deal with our problems. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I think it's just as simple as that. If you care about kids, then you should be talking about race and racism.
Oh, yeah. If you care about kids, then you should be talking about it. Interesting. You said you didn't want to be Black at any time. I've never felt that way. And you just make me wonder. I wonder what it was that didn't make me feel like I didn't want to be Black, because I went to a white elementary school, and I also graduated from a PWI. So it's not as if I haven't been exposed to the whiter side of life. So I just wonder, what was it that was instilled in me that made me proud to be a Black woman? Right. I want to ask you, Dr. Ioma, because you mentioned that the earlier we talk to a child about race and racism, the better. And I wonder, if we talk to them too early, are we teaching them to be racist?
So first of all, let's make sure we define what is racism. Remember, right? Racism is actually not a behavior between one person and another person, right? It's a system of oppression, a system that says that which is white or white leaning is better than that is not, right? So it's really a construction based on really skin color, et cetera, right? So children in many ways are not really sort of, it's one of those things where they don't have to create that. But we know already from the evidence that almost as early as 9 months, children already have preferences, right? So they have preference for those who look like them. By the age of 2, they know who's Black, who's white. Like, I remember my daughter was 3. My daughter is now 7. I remember when she was 3. She came home and said, "Oh, mommy, I'm trying to scratch my skin so it could be white." Because she went to an all-white school, and I understood
that. Would kill me. Right? Oh, I don't even know.
Mind you, I'm a Black mother, and I talk about racism, and my own Black child is talking about her skin color not being great. But you know what we have to do, me and my husband? We have to sit down and realize that we have to have a daily conversation and affirmation about how great she is. So this is what Black parents in particular have to do. We have to always affirm our children, tell them about their culture, their heritage, right? We have to create this other narrative that's positive, and that's called racial socialization. We all do that. So thinking about Will's life, I don't know what it was like, Will, but it makes me think of how much did your parents or those around you, adults, other caregivers, grandparents, talk about how beautiful it is to be Black, talk about the history. My name is Ioma Iruka, it's not Angela Smith, right? So I had to tell her about where's my roots from? Why do I have that name, right? So this is one of those things where we have to start early, because this is the time when children begin to identify who they are, right? We know that children identify their gender, right? Kids already, by the age of 3, are like, I want to play with only the boys. I want to play with only the girls. So kids begin to really identify who they are. And if we do not have these conversations, then white children in particular, right? So the problem is that Black parents are having this conversation. But the issue about white supremacy and racism is that white parents have to have this conversation about with their children about what is it, the privilege of being white, right? Which is unearned privileges, unearned outcomes that you have. And if white parents are not having these conversations, that puts the burden squarely on the shoulders of Black and brown parents to say, let me give you all these positive things when the rest of society is literally working against you.
Jose, I want to ask you, if your child came to you and said, I'm trying to wipe the Black off of me so my skin could be white, do you think that there's something about your parenting skills that have failed?
Probably, because all he's ever gotten is Black affirmation. All he's ever gotten was assertions about his own countries and, where he comes from. So, being Dominican and Haitian, for example, growing up, I was very fortunate to grow up on the Lower East Side where it was all multicultural. And let's just put a pin in this too, right? Being pro-Black does not mean that you're anti-white. And that's what we need to get out of that narrative too. Yeah. This idea that all of a sudden we have to consistently be in contrast to somebody else. And so when I was growing up, I was watching things like Eyes on the Prize. I was reading Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. I was reading James Baldwin at a very early age. So I saw myself in those books, in those texts consistently. And so, when I think about my own child, I'm like, I'm going to throw everything Black at you. And it's not to say that, you're going to start hating white people. Like, do you? But for me, I'm going to consistently, reaffirm his own cultures and teach him how to be Black in this country and start with that Black joy in addition to that resistance and struggle.
Yeah, and you have to, I would imagine, because I'm not a parent, but I would imagine as a parent, I am someone's child though. And I would imagine as a parent, you would have to, in this culture, in this society, in this America, throw everything Black at your child, because let's face it, when they go to school, they get no Black. I mean, beyond Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and maybe now Oprah Winfrey, they get no Black thrown at them. We get no sense of how Black America has shaped American history. And because of that, I don't think it's a Black is better than white or white is better than Black. I think it's a deficiency in our education system that parents have to overcompensate for as parents. And so I get it when you say that. We're going to take a quick break and come right back on the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Welcome back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul, where tonight the business of being Black is talking to your children about race and racism. Let's go to our chat room. The soulmates chatting. Incog. Hey, what's up, Incog? Children need to be talked to about racism so they are not ill-equipped to deal with societal issues and know how to be proactive than reactive. I would agree with that. Sarah Gilbert Bagwin says, tell them, Shiv. And then let's see what else we have here. Therese says, Tammi Mac, the business of being Black in 2021. Oh, you're suggesting I'm the business of being Black in 2020. Well, thank you. I accept that compliment. I didn't really get it at first, but I got it now. I'm pretty quick about that thing. So, Will, you wanted to talk about what we were talking about just before the break in terms of the schools kind of falling short when it comes to Black history and how Black people are a part of the fabric of America.
That's right. I think it was to the point where we're asking, are Black parents failing, talking to their kids about race and racism? And, one thing that resonated with me, Dr. Ioma, whenever you said, your daughter came to you with that experience, that experience is very similar to mine, but that wasn't a part of my mom's parenting. You know, my mom was a single mom working 3 jobs. Those conversations didn't happen. What failed was the setting in school, the curriculum in school. There was no space. There was constantly anti-Black messaging and erasure that happened constantly. And we still see that to today. And there's legislative fights going on right now about that. You know, we can get into that, but you know, whenever you spend 8 hours a day at school and all of your classmates are white and they're not getting these conversations at home, they're perpetuating the racism that they may or may not see in their everyday lives or at home into the classroom, into their interactions. So, you know, those things manifest, and it really does affect our children's mental health. And, you know, we begin to not love our Blackness, and that's just a product, that is a product of our society. So it does take a lot of work to combat that. And I know, Shiv, you had some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, no, Will, thank you. You know, what I will say is I'm an educator. I'm a high school teacher by day. And I work in one of the most marginalized communities in the metro Atlanta area where the average income is $17,500. And with my students, I mean, they walk to my classroom and they see my door decorated with Nipsey Hussle on it. They see a door next to it decorated with Gigi Bryant and Kobe Bryant. They see Panther logos on the ceiling. They see representation of themselves in all different facets, authentically and truly. And they know they can walk into my classroom and be exactly who they are. They know that they will get authentic lessons and authentic messaging about what it is to be Black, and knowing that when they show up in the room exactly themselves, they are enough and they're sufficient. And I think, you know, I want to push back on the notion that, you know, by default, that walking into schools, that students are not receiving education that acknowledges who they are as Black people, what our contributions are, because it really is happening. There is a wave of young Black educators and non-Black educators who are truly doing the work day in and day out. I literally spent the last 180 straight days since the murder of George Floyd with my students on the front lines marching for social justice throughout Atlanta. So we're doing this work inside and outside of the classroom. And you see it through what we call culturally responsive pedagogy, but you also see it through the implementation of critical race theory, which is a reason why you're seeing a lot of legislatures throughout the state governments throughout the country really pushing back on criticism of acknowledging whiteness as property. It's criticism.
Well, I want to say to that, Shivy, though, because we see these politicians pushing back on critical race theory. And we also see teachers who have Black Lives Matter signs in their classrooms in predominantly white schools be suspended or they have to take them down. Right. So would you agree that what you're saying about the teachers who are doing it now, and I would go as far to say is more Black teachers than white teachers are probably doing what you are doing. But that's not normal, wouldn't you? Like, that's not the norm.
Well, what I will say is I believe it's more normative than people would expect. What I would also say is this, like, please do mind, you know, me as a Black educator, I am less than 2% of all educators in some. Right? Mm-hmm. The predominant educator, 80% of educators are white women. We do have many allies. We do have many non-Black educators that are telling authentic truth and embracing Black culture and Black people in their classrooms. So, you know, it does happen. It really does happen. I think it happens more often than not. And I have the privilege of being an educator who has a large educator platform. So I'm seeing white educators like really doing this work. And it is more normative than one would expect. It is not enough. There is still more work to do. And we need more inclusion, because in order for us to make our classrooms safer places for Black and brown students, that is going to require the work of white people to do it.
Right. And I guess I'm not suggesting that it's not done. I mean, my high school was an all Black high school in the middle of Third Ward, Texas, where George Floyd was from, and also went to school in Third Ward, Houston, Texas, in Third Ward. So I do know that it exists to learn about Black history in some schools. But traditionally, in American classrooms, that is not the curriculum norm, I guess I'm saying. So if there is, I'm sorry, a movement of that, I think it's wonderful that you're sharing that with us, and that we now know that there are these swarm of teachers who are allies who want to include how Blacks have been a part of America, and who want to teach us more about Black America than just Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks.
But also, I would say, like, what is very important is on top of teaching our history and our the contributions that we've had to the fabric of America, it is very important that we make our classroom spaces where Black students can speak the language of their nurturer, where Black students can show up exactly as they are and feel valid, right? So that part is extremely important, that contemporarily we have an appreciation for Black existence within classrooms. Yeah. And so again, like, are we seeing it as much as we want to see it? No. But is there a wave of change coming among education? Yes.
Can I say, I mean, I want to be hopeful with Shiv, right? Like as an early educator in terms of, you know, researcher, policy analyst in this, I want to be hopeful. And I agree. I do think we see pockets of where there are both allies and those who are really engaged in sort of liberatory sort of teaching. I will still say that it's still education. Education is still a system that has historically underperformed when it comes to Black children, and now obviously with other children of color. And so while I want to have sort of this hopefulness, in the end of it, we know a lot of the superintendents in many places, even if they're Black, they're still, the institution of education is still in many ways erasing Black history. We see the textbooks are changing because we, like, for example, we know Texas is trying to change the textbooks to sort of whitewash what was enslavement period. And so even if we have teachers, the issue is that we have leaders that are not going to protect teachers, right? Because we even know with the pandemic, we saw a lot of teachers were leaving the workforce. Now that's in the K-12 system. For those of us who may even be working with, who are educators who work with younger children, that's even worse, who are underpaid, undervalued, and who don't even have curriculum that speak to sort of anti-racism teaching for young children, because people fear, oh my God, young children should never speak about race. So I want to be really hopeful, and I want us to continue to push, you know, folks like Shiv, right? Exactly, 2% of the K-12 population of educators are Black males. And so I think we need to continue to push to say, why don't we have more Black males? Why don't we have more Latino males? Why don't we have more Black teachers? Again, we have to continue to push on the system. We can work inside the schools, but we have to work in the system, because if the books are changing, that means that we can never tell our history unless something changes. So I want us to kind of think both in terms of what's happening in the classroom, but also what's happening to actually address the system. Because once the whole idea of desegregation happened, integration never happened. We lost droves of Black intellectual teachers, and we are still feeling those effects till today. So I think in many ways, we want to continue to push allies, but I want to see my kids have Black teachers. I literally had two Black teachers.
Feel that. I because representation matters, obviously.
Yeah.
I want to go to our chat room. Keeping Nettie says, my parents didn't have to talk about racism. Instead, I grew up watching Roots, Shaka Zulu, Glory, and The Color Purple. Therese says, Shivy is happening, but not enough, and not as part of the curriculum. And no, it's not the norm. I don't think Shivy suggested it was the norm at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah, you didn't.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. That's definitely not the norm. I don't want to get in your way. Go ahead.
And Alexa says it is the norm in New York City.
I got something to say about that. So what it is that 4 out of the 5 biggest school districts in the country, that being New York, Philly, Clark County, Nevada, and I forgot the other one, but generally, yeah, thank you. So generally speaking, when you have big populous cities, you're going to see a lot of teacher diversity. New York City is, I think, more than 50% teachers of color. And then, of course, you know, the richer the school gets, the less of color it gets. And the same thing happens all across the board. But then when you look at the surrounding suburbs, they start becoming more and more white, to the point where a lot of those schools don't even make 10% of teachers of color, which is why that number for teachers of color overall in the nation is so small. It's not the cities. And that's why like these pockets, like the Atlantas of the world, the Austins of the world, so, you know, Los Angeles has a lot, they have a lot of teachers of color. But then within that, I think what we're also talking about too is like, we want to make sure that the teaching profession aligns with the community values in which they're in. So one of the biggest things I must have done, and of course my wife was like, you know, we both were very stressed about what school we were going to choose for our son. But I went to go visit the local public school in Harlem. And the first teacher that I got to really see was a veteran Black woman teacher. And that's when I said, you know what? This is the classroom I want my child in. This is the school that I want my child in. Like, you can't even shake me from this point on. And I was amazed for the whole entire year. The level of care, the level of dignity, the level of respect that my child got, the affirmation that he was able to see on a daily basis from having a Black woman teacher who's a veteran, who's an expert, whose own values were aligned to that of the Harlem community writ large. And so when we talk about, you know, having more Black teachers, it isn't just about changing the face of the folks who drive the ship. It is changing the whole direction of the ship writ large. We need to make sure that like everybody who's in those school buildings actually feels like they can actually teach the culturally responsive lessons, that they can actually have the conversation around tragedies that happen so often, that they can actually engage in a diversification of books, that we align the Morrisons and the Baldwins with like all the other dead white men that you consistently see, right? Like, these are movements that need to keep happening. But, you know, the folks who are most likely to teach those things are the folks who are most likely to be under-resourced, more stressed out, pushed out of classrooms historically. And then, you know, not to mention that, you know, generally speaking, like, so many of us are just so fly. Like, come on now. Like, our teaching is just that much better. So for me,
listen,
I want to put some slides on it. It's just fact. It's fact.
What I want to add
we're
to that
definitely
is that,
hold that thought, Shivy. I'm
Yeah.
coming right back to you. We're gonna take a commercial break. I don't know how Black it's gonna be, but we're gonna get 2 minutes of it in. We'll be right back on the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul. Now that I can promise you. Welcome back to the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul, where tonight the business of being Black is teaching our kids about race and racism. So I'm gonna skip some pieces here because there's something I want to get into. Will talked about what the conversations are that we should be having with our children, but I'm more concerned about the conversations that we should be having with white children, because so often Black people are tasked with dealing with racism that is impressed upon us through the white system. So then what is it that white folk should be telling their children? Anyone?
Oh, anyone? Oh, I'll take that, because, you know, I mentioned that, you know, I think, so I think number one, that white parents have to actually examine their own identity, right? Because part of actually being able to talk about race and racism is talking about your own identity. Like, right, the privilege of being white means that you could be white and don't have to question anything about yourself, right? Because everything is about you. And so I think that first takes white parents to talk about their own identity. Then the second part is for them to actually examine, who are you reading? Who are your books? What are the books in your bookshelf? Like, number one is like, ask who's in your bookshelf. Who's your doctor's pediatrician? Where do you go, right? So in many ways, for parents to actually begin to have that conversation, AKA white parents to have that conversation, they have to begin to acknowledge, they have to actually make their whiteness visible, right? And you can't do that if you're not literally actually unearthing your own identity, unearthing the history. So this is where, to me, the education or the miseducation of America happens, right? Because a lot of us don't get the full history of America. So I am at UNC Chapel Hill. For those who may have been sleeping, we have, you know, we know that, you know, Nicolet Hannah-Jones, the MacArthur Genius Fellow, right now was not given tenure because people were questioning or don't agree with the 1619 Project that talks about the enslavement of Black people and the brutal history of whiteness. And so imagine that kind of history never comes out. That means that people just say Black people just came here because they wanted to work, right? So if white people don't understand that their whiteness is sort of this property that's being used in many ways and perpetrated brutality and oppression on people, then they can't have real conversation with their children about what does it mean to be white, you know, to have unearned conferred privilege, right? That yes, you probably worked hard, but there's some things that you didn't get. And so for me, white parents have to begin to have those kind of conversations. And I think that's going to be really, really hard if we don't give them the tools, if we're not part of these larger conversations. But I agree that this burden of racism is on Black people at the moment you're born. Before you're born, racism is already on top of children, because children, actually Black children, are likely to be born preterm or low birth weight, and that puts you at risk. And then over time, you're likely to be suspended, you're likely to be in prison, you're likely to be unemployed. So in many ways, Black people wear all of racism, and white parents don't have to do that. They don't have to talk about it to their kids until they're 14 or 15 or something, if ever. But this means that white parents have to begin to have these really hard conversations that they've never had to have, right? They can't protect
and because
the
when you
innocence of their
tell a
children.
child, when you tell a child that, Dr. Mioma, the first thing the child says is why. And then you as a white person have to answer why. Why are Black people treated different? Jose, I see you shaking your head in agreement there. So go ahead. I know you got something on your mind.
Listen, I think I think for so many adults, it actually starts with very pre-kindergarten ideas. Learn how to share, kids. Like, it's real simple. Learn how to share. Oh, what's fair? Oh, do you know how to like hold hands? Do you know how to be courteous and open doors and say please and thank you to everybody who's involved, especially if like you may or may not know the person? I feel like it's just it feels so basic, but white supremacy holds it where it's not. And that's one part. I think the second part too has to do with this idea that, like, when you look at all the people who you consider friends in your social network, right? And if you're able to name the one Black friend, if they don't reciprocate that energy to you, then they are not your friend. You need to go ahead and investigate that sort of thing. Like that, it starts from like, and the work relationships is the same thing. Like, if the only person you know
repeat that, Jose, repeat that. That's bears repeating.
If the only Black person you know in your friend circle does not believe that you are also a good friend to them, then maybe you don't have any Black friends. And that's the way it goes. And the same thing goes in your work circles. If the only people you know are the custodians and the other folks who are kind of like the periphery or the help or whatever have you, and they don't feel the same way about you, then they are not your friends. They are not your colleagues. Matter of fact, even the folks who, unfortunately, like even with Black, we were talking about Black male teachers, right? Like, too often you have a lot of white teachers who go into schools who think that the Black person who is the AP, the superintendent, it has to be the overseer for the Black kids. So they never actually deal with the Black kids who, like, are actually, going through serious trauma. They never want to deal with that. They never actually want to build the relationship and be vulnerable enough to say, you know what, I got to sacrifice something in order for me to share with you. Like, you have to be able to construct a new table in order for you to be thoughtful about the people who you're actually eating with. And by the way, like, if you keep eating the same thing and you don't know anything above salt and pepper, then perhaps you can't eat with Black folks either, because we be hitting up the spices, right?
Latinx. Oh, you stepping on some toes now, Jose. You
I step on the whole foot. Like, I'm going
talking about the way folks seasoning their food now. Hold on.
Real. Listen,
Will, I want to ask you. So Olsen Edwards, a lifetime activist for children and families, said if children do not see themselves, if they do not see their families reflected back to them in the world, in the school, the books, the movies, everything else, what you have done has been to erase a phenomenal part of who they are. What are your thoughts on that statement, Will?
I think that's absolutely right. Representation matters. It's a key and fundamental piece to everything we do. I mean, I think, J. Cole said it, you turn on the TV, not one hero in sight unless he dribbles or fiddles with mics, and so we have to have these role models, people in our lives every day, every aspect, that look like our kids, look like our families, to let them know that anything is possible, because without that, there is no pathway or avenue. And that's really what my work is about and what I try to do, because if kids can't see that, then they don't know. So I think they hit it right on the head. And that really is the history of America. I mean, since America has been erasing indigenous culture and lives since we came over here, to just thinking about how we erase history in our textbooks, thinking about the Daughters of the Confederacy, everything like that. So I think he's right.
Yeah, you dropping J. Cole and Chivy dropping Nipsey Hussle on his school door, and then Jose dropping salt on the way white folk season their chicken. Chivy, what do you think? What do you think kids miss in this whole racism thing? And I'm speaking specifically of the kids that you teach. Or maybe a better question is, what are they asking for?
They're just asking for us to be honest and to acknowledge where the gaps are. And for adults to be willing and to have the integrity to be the bridge over many of these gaps. Many of our students really, they don't lack know-how, they don't lack ambition. The only thing they lack is opportunity. And truly, when given that opportunity, we've seen the levels of excellence that many of our Black students have consistently risen to. And so it's very hard, to be what you've never seen. So our babies, they really just need access to really understanding what is available to them here in the world. And
you
when
have
they
two
see
sons also. You have a
Yeah.
14-year-old and a 5-year-old. What have
Mhm.
you told them about George Floyd, about racism? Did they know about racism prior to George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery? What is your conversation?
Well, what I will say is this, on the night that Rayshard Brooks, whose picture is actually sitting right over my shoulder, the night he was murdered, I got a phone call 2:00 in the morning that someone had been shot at the Wendy's right around the corner from my house. And I got up out of my bed to bring the community to a calm, so that we didn't have violence on that night. And I showed up for my community. So my babies, they knew exactly where daddy was, because that's the call that I answer day in and day out here in the city of Atlanta. But I lived to tell of two upraisings with my two sons. With my 14-year-old son, he started coming into cognition during 2008 when Barack Obama was elected. And when we had, there was many of us, especially young millennial parents, who wanted to aspire to live in a post-racial society. What I learned very quickly by not teaching my son about race before his schools or his white teachers decided to, that I was giving white kids a head start. And so with my 5-year-old son, I learned from my mistakes, and I've completely understood that I had an absolute responsibility to teach my son about who he was, about how the world is set up to cause some things to be in the way, but what we can do as a people to navigate and around those things and to have collective upward mobility.
You know
And
what?
so,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, man.
You just brought something completely to my mind. There is a generation that grew up only knowing a Black president for 8 years.
That was my
That
son.
same generation was then faced with George Floyd and the slew of others that died at the hands of the police before him. What an incongruent way to grow up in America. What does this say? What does this mean, Dr. Yoma?
Well,
What
let's
does it say
remember,
about America?
it tells us the truth of America. Even for those kids who grew up during President Obama's time, remember all the vitriol that he received, right? We saw all of what was happening. And so for those of us who thought we were in post-racial, as soon as he was elected, for those who understood and know America, we knew that we were going to go backwards, because that's just who we are. So this is why I'm so, just to hear Shiv talk about sort of how he started to really hone in on, we have to start the conversation with our young children, right? Not just to talk about the brutality and oppression and the horridness of racism against Black children and other people of color, but really that we have to begin to uphold and show them that you are more than what the country tells you, that you are great, that you should be joyful, right? This is the power of what our community can do, is even in the face of all the negativity, that what we have to do is, as early as possible, begin to shape that message, begin to shape their brain, their identity, the way they see themselves, the way they see others who look like them, the way they see their community, that we have to start early. So President Obama, I think, was an amazing force in many ways, but it also was the force that brought out the Donald Trumpers, right?
Yeah, it definitely
So it made that.
Look, we turned the light on and the roaches just came out. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back on the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Welcome back to the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul, where we're talking about, well, the business of being Black tonight is about talking to your children about race and racism. So in April, and I'm sure you all are familiar with this story, a Georgia daycare center was accused of racism after parents saw teachers on the center's live stream video feeding white children their lunch first, while Black children were made to wait before they were served their lunch. Shivy, we've got to go to you on this story because you're in the heart of Georgia.
Yeah. Well, I will say, look, shout out to one of my brothers, Scotty Smart.
I think we just lost him. We just lost you, Shivy. We'll give you that one.
Yeah, this story, it compels me, I'm just like, it doesn't make sense. Number one, I think the fact of the matter is like no child should be denied food like for any reason. I think it's ridiculous. I think in early learning centers, a majority of our childcare providers are Black, especially our home care providers are Black. So I don't really even know what to say to this. I really don't.
Right. It's like, really, at some point we run out of words because
I really don't.
It's so leaves you so speechless. According to The Guardian, teachers' implicit bias against Black students starts in preschool. So obviously that's why we see that story. Findings reveal the subconscious racial bias of teachers who directed attention more closely to Black boys when challenging behavior is expected. So Shivy, I know you were in the middle of talking about that story. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I got disconnected there. I'm not sure what happened, but my brother Scotty Smart and some other activists here in Atlanta were made aware of exactly what happened there. And shout out to the parents of those Black kids who helped us to understand what was happening. But what really happened to answer the call to what the deal was that those people ended up losing their license to operate under the franchise that they were operating in. And I think that shows the strength of community. And that also shows the strength of what Atlanta is and why Atlanta is considered the Black Mecca of America. Because when things like that happen, when we come together as a community, when we stand up, people have to answer and there is accountability. It is gross what is happening. And the truth is that we see things like this happen throughout schools, throughout systems. This is why on the north side of a town, you'll see more resources than you will on the south side of a town. We have to pay attention. We have to be vigilant and we have to be forward leaning to making sure that we have equity, that we have inclusion, and that we are advantaging as much as we can for all of our babies, no matter where they are.
Jose, you're an educator as well. How do you address racism in your classrooms?
So much of it is about not just addressing implicit bias, but explicit bias. And that's why so often I keep preaching to people like the anti-racist training is not a one-shot deal. It is something that you have to be about. You have to be about that life consistently. You have to show up, not just in the spaces where other Black people are as a white person. You have to actually have the conversation with the grandpa, with the grandma, with your family members, with people in your own communities. Because the way that segregation works is so often a lot of the teachers who work in predominantly Black schools will say, okay, well, I did my social justice business and I get to go back to my home where it's all white all around me. Nah, we gotta remix that some. And so that's a lot of what integration is supposed to be about. It isn't about just mixing any number of people. It's actually having a shared sense of power. So any given time that you have somebody who doesn't necessarily understand the culture, they have to find a way to reintegrate themselves into that culture, get a good understanding of the human beings that are fully in there. And that's a consistent conversation that I'm having with so many white teachers. How do you see other people as full human beings, worthy of the dignity and respect and love and care that they fully deserve?
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back on the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul. So War Bunny in our chat room says, Mr. Vilson, my favorite teacher. Keeping Nettie says, tell children, male, female, Black or white, that we are all created equal and you don't know who can kick your butt. Okay, I see where you're coming. Jose, the book is This Is Not a Test, a new narrative on race, class, and education. Where can we get it?
Anywhere books are sold, of course, I would love for y'all to buy it from independent bookstores, especially Black-owned bookstores, wherever possible. And of course, you know the vibes already. Like I got any number of things for myself, Jose Wilson, thejosevilson.com, as well as EduColor, which is the movement to ensure that racial and social justice movements are happening within our schools, in our classrooms, and our communities. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Ioma, how can we learn more about the Riser Network and the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute?
Well, you can definitely go to iomeruka.com as well as Riser Network at BU. And I would say for me is obviously continue to push on the national agenda for Black children to make sure that we're being protected, promoted, and our history and culture and language are being preserved. So check it out also with the Equity Research Action Coalition at FPG, where we're doing a lot of work around research, policy, and practice to center Black people in our lives and our assets. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Will, you produced a professional development video for PBS called Tools for Anti-Racist Teaching.
That's right.
Now, is that good for anybody or just for those who are teaching?
It's good for anybody, centered for educators. We've got season 2 coming out the 15th, the 17th, the 22nd, and 24th. It's free. It really does center anti-racism education for everybody. It's about shifting perspectives, pedagogy, and power in the intersections of Blackness, mental health, and history. I hope you all can join us. You can sign up at PBS Learning Media. You'll find it if you Google it.
Shivy, I'm ready for my sign to say Shivy for president, but I know you're over there in Atlanta vying for city council. See, my dreams for you are bigger. So how can we support this?
Well, this is just the beginning and a continuum of my journey to serve our communities and those who typically are not heard. You can go to brooks4foratl.com. You can see a little bit more about my platform. And no matter where you are, we all know Atlanta is the Black Mecca of the world. And you can support this campaign so that we can bring a youthful, progressive, forward-thinking voice to Atlanta City Council.
I want to thank you all for talking to us about race and talking to our children about race and racism tonight. It's been a very productive conversation. So thank you, Dr. Ioma. Thank you, Will, Shivy, and Jose. Thank you so very much for the work and the service that you do out here for race and just for America in general. Listen, I'm going to do a little service for you right now, too. Fox Soul deals are coming up right now, which means I'm about to give you a deal. Yeah, I'm not running for city council and I ain't got no PBS special and I ain't got no book. But I tell you what I do have. I got some way for you to save a little money. So Fox Soul deals are up next. Until tomorrow, everybody, it's a blessing to be in your box on the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Bye, y'all.